Irrational Radio.
Create something.
Hey everybody, welcome to another Table 13. I am a wooden leg, and next to me here is Mr. E, International Man of Mr. E. That was pretty forced. I'm sorry. That was bad.
That's the pun. It's all right.
It is. If anyone didn't get that now
That's
has
the
been
idea.
like, oh, that's clever.
My name's also Eric. So
yes, there's multiple levels of meaning
like
here.
an onion.
And I actually don't have a wooden leg, so I can't say the same thing.
It's a very funny name, though.
Yeah. Long story back that. But that is not the topic of tonight. The topic of tonight is world building, like how to build a universe, how to like put together a pantheon of gods, how to make religions, all that kind of thing. We're going to be probably not talking about all that. We're probably going to be stuck on one topic that we find we have the most to talk about, but we'll just dive right in here. So, Mr. E, when you sit down to like build a world for a brand new campaign, what's the first thing that you do?
Usually I draw a map, because and I start with like England, UK sized landmass. Yeah, like not or twice that maybe. Yeah, I usually try and start with something that has a bunch of map off the edges, and then it's so you can kind of focus on the area where you want to actually start the campaign.
The what's west of Westeros kind of idea.
Right,
yeah.
And then and you can, because you can talk about that, and then the next step is I'll try and get like a bigger map, but I'll just sketch those out. I won't try and make anything that I'm going to show to the players for a while probably. Unless you're in my chittering game, when I just kind of threw one of my notebook paper sketches in there and was like,
wonderful.
Sorry guys, that's what you get.
Hey, that works.
That campaign came together in a week. So
yeah.
And that's the thing is you don't need, it's about getting things organized in your head. And for me, it's very helpful to say, okay, yeah, this is a thing that's important because you can look at why it would be, strategically, or like, okay, so I got to put a city there. Like I can do some sort of Constantinople thing, or
right.
You can look at like, I don't know what where your rivers are in the middle of big land masses, do stuff like that, or go down the line there. But it helps to get the idea of the world in. But I think that's like while I'm doing that, I'm thinking about sort of the what trope or video game or movie I'm stealing from for the main like plot of everything, and so like is it like the chittering, is it a red wall mixed with Dragon Age thing, or is it like it's more along the lines of a Game of Thronesy human focused intrigue in cities and shit like that, and you kind of try and figure out what your big broad strokes are. And
right.
I guess that's one of the points. Yeah, is like tropes are good.
Yes.
Good shorthand at least,
or at least good
like
starting points.
Right. And I mean they're relatable. So if you can say, "Oh, did you play Dragon Age?"
Right.
Okay. Yeah. Well, the chittering are like the Darkspawn, and it's like people are already 90% of the way there, and then you can start talking about how they're different.
Yeah.
And so if you can just acknowledge when. Or if somebody says, "Oh, is it like this?" and it's something, it's similar. It's like, okay, yeah, like don't, it's, it can feel like somebody saying, "Oh, well, your idea is not unique, so it's bad." No. And I think that's, you want to like avoid that. Like D&D especially, but like role playing in general is about living out tropes. You want it to be sort of stereotypical and have bar fights where you can throw people through windows and stuff like that. That's the goal.
You ride a roller coaster for riding a roller coaster. Like you can't like say, "Here, ride my roller coaster," and it'd be like a train track in the backyard that doesn't go up and down, like there's no hills. It's just is not a roller coaster, and so it's just like,
they have those.
Hey,
they're just for kids.
Yeah, they're just for kids. Or it's just like a roller coaster, and you show them like a swimming pool, and you're like, that's not a roller coaster.
Not a roller coaster.
But he's like, no. This is a roller coaster that's never been done before. All those other roller coasters, they've got like supports, and they're made of metal, and they got a track. I
Like
didn't
this
want to
track
copy
thing.
those roller coasters, so
Yeah.
my roller coaster has none of that. I want a brand never before. It's not going to
Yeah, that's
work.
true.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if you get too far, oh, and that's there's another side of that. That is, if you're working so hard to keep everything utterly unique, you're making more work for yourself,
Yeah, and
and
your players,
there's
honestly.
more information,
Yeah,
to convey, and
yeah,
then
yeah,
there's more little things that can trip your players up. So,
yeah,
keeping things slushy on, until it comes to the table, I guess, that's another thing we talked about
yeah,
before,
absolutely.
but that's, the rule cool versus raw. It's like,
Yeah,
and I think that's just your best bet.
yeah, yeah.
Um,
I agree. And kind of piggybacking off of that, you don't have to make every single thing about your world like filled in before you start your campaign. I
mhm.
don't like to do a lot of that. I like to kind of like build the world around how the players are interacting with it so that it's a little bit more like reactive or like what the players are looking for in a role playing game. Because like I've gone from an adventure story to intrigue or intrigue to adventure or like like horror to adventure, and you can never really. In my opinion, I don't like to try to nail down the theme or like the really large, well, not large, but like the smaller plot arcs until the role players really have the time to get in there and like chew on it. And so for the first city, I might like name the mayor and the place and like show the surrounding towns like where they're headed, but I'm not going to have, the mayor's maiden name figured out. I'm not going to have like when his last marriage was or anything like that. It's going to be more of like if it's convenient that he have been divorced 3 years ago, and I hadn't thought about that until this session. Now, voila! Now he's divorced 3 years ago, and it's really cool because it fits with what players are doing, or it helps tell the story in some way, or move the world along. Um, and it kind of goes back to what we were talking about, like keeping it slushy. You don't want to nail down those details that could later like hamstring you. And
Yeah.
yeah, I see a lot of world builders kind of writing themselves into corners in terms of like letting their players do stuff or how they're allowing, and I am included in that. I built a world called Stotopglod, and it was for a hero system
Yeah.
role playing game, like that system rather than Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah.
And I tried to convert it over to Dungeons and Dragons, and it didn't work because
The scale
it
doesn't
didn't
match
yeah,
up, and the setting can't be easily reflected. Like,
right.
it's there are little nuanced things like that. So I would say that's another thing is I work with maybe like super arcs as far as like, okay, this is like a piece of tension and drama that's kind of shaped the land in a way
Mm-hmm.
that I can use as details down the line. I'm sort of like, okay, this is a big struggle, or like elves and humans don't like each other because of this, or whatever, that you can use as
Right.
kind of like a stereotyping tool down the line to use throughout your kind of finer working stuff, like you're saying. Certain stories can, if the way you write them, or settings, if they have too much detail, can it kind of
Yeah.
box you in from
Yep.
a narrative standpoint sometimes. And I think if you can get vague, like, okay, there's a change in power in the emperor in the area, and people are sketchy about his recent death or something. It's
Right.
like, okay, it's not going to come into play in the first session directly, but like maybe people are talking about it, and like, you can do stuff like that, and then that's going to set up some sort of tension down the line where maybe you've got, it's like a Skyrim situation. You got your players being able to pick one side or the other of this civil war that's brewing, and
Yeah.
kind of help along one side, or overthrow the establishment, or whatever. And like you're saying, as you kind of let them set the pace, it's like maybe they don't care about that, and that's fine. Then that's just dressing that's in the background,
Right.
and it doesn't have to come back up until whatever, you can somehow tie it into what they
Mm-hmm.
are interested in, or it just doesn't, and that's okay.
Yep.
There's no harm in stuff that doesn't get used, because there's
No.
gonna be, it's like it's maybe 80% of it isn't going to find its way to the table sometimes, and then half of that your players aren't going to remember
Yeah.
as significant and important information. So it's you want to, it's good if it can direct you, but you don't want to focus too hard on details. Absolutely. I think you want generic themes and things along those lines to start.
Especially to start with. Kind of going off what you said, like, you don't want to waste a ton of your time filling out details that aren't going to be used, because that's time that you could have better spent used on, like, details that are going to be used, or, like, preparing for the next session rather than preparing for, like, you know, or writing down the economies of countries that they're hundreds of miles away from. You know, it's more important that you, like, work on the session at hand. And and you know, kind of going along with that, there's some world building things that I see are, like, neglected, or not necessarily neglected, or maybe more difficult to pull off than, like, a long list of names, or, you know, like something that I'm going off of is dialect. Like, how are you going to present this group of people as a DM that is going to make them different than the town hundreds of miles over? You know, if the only, you know, voice you're going to use is, like, the crotchety farmer, and I'm very it's going to sound the same.
God has 6 voices or whatever. It's like, that's the best you are, unless you're a professional voice actor and you have trillions.
Right.
Then okay, fuck you a little bit. I'm jealous. But like, you got to work with what you can, and just try and convey the theme of the character. And if it's if you have 3 voices, then just keep in mind, and try and, like, okay, well, can I throw one of them up a pitch or down a pitch, or
and there's other ways,
tweak the little things.
You can have 2 people that sound a lot alike that still talk very different ways.
That's true too.
You know, you can something that I like to do is, like, throw in sayings that areas have that other areres don't. Because then I can say it, like, however I need to, even if I have 6 voices. If someone is like, give
jargon,
a whistle, and someone else has the same voice, but they never say that phrase. It's going to be
they're very well, but it's slower or something. Yeah, you can change cadence and or put a stutter in, or do stuff like that. And I think that you're right. It's not just like you gotta have the physical voice thing to right there. That's a very good tool, I would think too. I don't think I use that as regularly as I should. I
like regional sayings are a good way to set places apart from other places that don't rely on you knowing how to speak a Russian accent and a Mexican accent. There are and that's
a good one.
Yeah, that's the thing.
It's less work.
Right? You just have, like, and it doesn't take much either. Like, if you just have, like, a single page of euphemisms or sayings or colloquialisms that this group of people have that this group of people never say, you're going to end up with 2 people that sound very different in conversation, And then the number of, like, colloquialisms that are used can set people apart. Like, everyone knows that dude literally just speaks in colloquialisms. Like, every morning he's like, "It's raining cats and dogs," and you're like, "Okay, Tim, that's fine. That's cool."
Phyllis.
Yeah.
Yeah,
exactly.
Speaks in cliches.
So you could have 2 people that sound exactly like, that are from the same area, but one is just does all of the area cliches, and the other one is like, okay, yeah, he talks kind of funny because he really likes the way we talk around here. There are definitely people that, like, lean into their where they're from, rather than
like New Yorkers.
Yeah, like New Yorkers, or like, people who live deep in the Appalachian Mountains. They kind of take pride in being hard to understand among people other than themselves. In fact, there's a ton of places. Yeah. Like, almost every place has that kind of group of people that,
like, everybody thinks that everyone else talks weird.
But yeah, bringing it back into the world building here. These are like things that you can think about to make your world a little bit more varied without having to be a professional voice actor and that kind of thing. Kind of going back to what we started talking about, you don't have to be a Picasso to draw a map that is usable by your players or even by you. You know, if you just want to draw a map for yourself, as long as you can understand what you have written, it works. It's gonna work. And
that's how maps work.
Yeah,
like for a very long time. They were very effective,
and they were very rough.
Subway maps aren't like accurate, physically, but they work for the tool that they, need to accomplish. It's not, you know what I mean? Like you can, symbol. It's a symbol of distance you need to cover and stuff like that. So it doesn't have to be exact.
And
I guess
I would say that just from my experience is where you should start in terms of like physical work. But you should have an idea before you set out. And also I find that, at least for me, some settings are easier to world build than others.
cows.
Yeah.
Cow-based settings are real tough.
Real hard to do the cow-based setting. Yeah. The ferret-based setting is a little easier, but cows are hard. But like just genre, like it's. I tried to build a campaign that took place inside a computer. Basically, it was a giant space computer that had been broken off from an ancient weapon, and there were people living inside of it. And I sat down to draw the map for that. And
what do I do?
I was just like, I don't know how to. Like, did I just take a picture of a circuit board and just like put dots on it, and I started thinking like, shit, there's no gravity here. Like how
there's no friction.
There's no friction. Yeah, it's just like how do these people live? And I was like, okay, there's like how do they grow shit? And it just became so alien. I was like, no one is gonna understand what's going on because it's gonna be so different from like the world that normal people walk around in that I'm gonna have to be explaining, some stuff every 5 minutes.
I think that brings up a decent point too. Is that you can go for crazier settings like that if you're gonna have to sacrifice quote unquote realism sometimes. Like there's gonna be more hand waving. I think the more like stuff like friction. It's just like, well, it is. There is. Whatever.
You can breathe. Don't ask me why.
Yeah, shut up. Like
shut up. Yeah.
It's cool. And just. Or like nobody needs to, so it's fine.
Right?
Or,
yeah.
Whatever. Like,
whatever. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think you can, if you're willing to take the hit on like every once in a while saying, yeah, you're right, it should work that way, and then
doesn't.
Like shrugging it off and going with yours anyway because it will destroy like the next 3 sessions or whatever.
So this brings up like following along the same line though. If you don't want your setting to break your rules either. The rules of the role-playing game, as we pointed out, are more important to keep consistent than the world. And so if you're going to like have a place that doesn't have any gravity, how are you going to represent that in like 5e in terms of like
you're gonna play D&D.
Right. It's going to be really difficult. And you're going to have a lot of wasted mechanics that have been built into the system that aren't going to be used because everyone is flying. There's no gravity.
Right. Yeah.
And so you might want to look at not running it in a 5e system, finding another system that works better or changing the setting. That kind of goes back to the Stadopglad thing. The reason it was so difficult is because it was like a city of ex-immortals living with mortals that had just been born after the release of Death. And so these ex-immortals were like demigods. They were wandering around the streets. And I was like, how do I represent like a person that could just murder a player character in a single like flip, And I was like, I'll just make them all level 20. And I was just like, no, this is dumb too. Like it's super beings and so I just made them NPCs with an AC of like 30 and just, that's good enough. But
that was early.
Yeah, that was early.
Early in the 5e career. Had
But
to explain him the difference
yep,
between 3.5 and 5e
yep.
stats. I said, no, bud, it doesn't get like that.
Oh,
I
you
go,
can't. That's bad.
"Yes."
That's hard.
They instituted a system of bounded accuracy between the two. ACs don't really go over, I think it's like 24 or
Yeah.
something. But yeah. Anyway, sorry.
But yeah, and that just kind of goes, the setting that I had in my mind wasn't going to fit with the system's mechanics. Like the world that I had built didn't really sit very well with the 5e system at large. And so
Yeah.
when you're building your world, you're gonna want to keep in mind the system that is primarily going to be run in this world because it's going to inform a lot, like everything in your game. And it's going to matter more than your setting in a lot of different situations while you're playing the game. Because, like
Yeah.
you're,
If yeah, mechanics are going to come into play
right.
very often. And yeah, and it's going to dictate the way narrative solutions are arrived at frequently. Like if they can, if like, I don't know, trying to think. I guess like building guns into 5e or something. If you do something more, if they're much more powerful or not balanced properly, that are compared to ranged weapons, you can get into a sort of similar position. I think where it's like, yeah, it's like maybe they just don't worry about it because they know they've got like, oh, well, I can just pop him and
Right.
he's gone. It's a solution's over, or and so like there's not as much incentive to um work through a normal narrative interaction with whoever it is that or whatever piece of your world that it is you're building. So it's like these greater chunks, and their relationship to the mechanics, or if it's a very high magic setting, or you're playing in a modern like a
Yeah.
modern day thing, and
Yep.
everyone has cell
D21.
phones, like then it's you got to keep that in mind. Like people won't
Yeah.
just be able to not, there's got to be that scene where you look at your phone and there's no
No
bars or
signal.
something, just
Yeah.
to remind everybody that that's not a solution you have at the moment or something. Uh, and yeah, it's just that kind of stuff. It's gonna run into how your players interact with the setting you've made. So yeah, you got to think about how it does interact with the mechanics. I think
Yep.
that's really important too.
Yeah. It's very important. And kind of going along with what you're saying here is it's not that running like a high, like super high magic or a modern setting is impossible in terms of like the other systems.
Right.
It just requires you to be a little bit more delicate, I guess, with the way that you present the problems that you present your characters while being inside of your world, because you want it still to be you want still the problems that they have, that you present them to be solved through cleverness or whatever, without them having to just pull out their phone and then like every time you're like, oh no, the phones they don't work, and you're just like, why didn't you put us in a modern
Why
setting
do we
if
have that if it's
if,
never gonna work?
if
I
it's never
guess.
if we're in a high magic setting and you keep taking our magic
There's
away
anti-magic fields
right
everywhere.
everywhere,
That's
like, why
it's
did you make the setting like this? Why not just low magic and make magic rare? Because you're basically
although
doing that now.
you can make the argument that like, well, in a high magic setting, people would understand and be aware of that, and that
Now,
that
see
would be all over
that.
the place.
Yeah, see.
And you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But then you have to build that into your world.
Yep.
It's got to be a part of the setting. If it is understood by everybody that yeah, mages are all over the place. There's 3 in my family or something
Yeah.
like that. Then like,
And they're
then
crazy
yeah, you got
dangerous.
yeah, exactly. Then you have businessmen who are just like, okay, well, we only talk in here, and there's a it's a it's an
Yep.
anti-magic circle or something that I've had engraved into the floor permanent, and like or in court they testify under zone of truth or something like
Yep.
that. You know what I mean? Like things like that could be commonplace. They and you can do things like that to kind of insulate yourself as a DM from players who want to just kind of
Cheese
set it
their
on
way
fire,
through.
basically.
Yeah, exactly.
Which that's kind of the way it goes most of the time
Yeah.
anyway. Like it's a sort of, it's not you hope it's not a competition or whatever, but I mean you are going to be sort of letting them go through and leave their mark, which is
Yep.
by definition screwing some of your stuff up.
Yeah.
So it's got to be, and then you want realistic, reasonable kind of consequences following up from that. So you got to think about how people would respond reasonably.
Yeah.
So yeah,
And
starting with, sorry, go ahead.
well, yeah, I was going to say about the like consequences. I have been guilty of that in my own like role playing career. Like I've had people that have basically done something like, oh, you killed the acolyte of this church, and then I've had like the god of that church thunder down to the player characters, and yeah, that's probably not what would happen if this was like a real like situation.
I mean, I think that the other extreme is also a concern. That's more one that I'm prone to, is that there's really no consequence.
Right.
Maybe like, yeah, okay, they like, yeah, it's I'll bring it up every once in a while that people aren't happy or are talking about it or something, but maybe there aren't any. They didn't send out any paladins to go hunt them down or something like that. You know what I mean? Like so I do. Yeah, there's definitely a balance there somewhere that you want to be aware of too. Is this sort of like, okay, so, and I mean, maybe you have very active and present gods, and that is exactly how they'd respond, but you want that to connect back to the world somehow. Yeah, it would, so it's normal. So it would happen all the time. So the players aren't surprised when that happens. So they're not saying, well, shit, I wouldn't have killed him if I had known that was going to happen. Kind of. You don't want them in that position. You want them saying, well, yeah, that was why I killed him. I wanted that guy to show up so I could have this conversation or whatever. It's like, okay, then you have a cool thing kind of idea.
Yeah, it was
basic.
Yeah, it was not quite earned, I guess you could say, in terms of storytelling. And it wasn't even the god. It was literally an embodiment of a pillar of the universe came to talk to the player characters who were not in the level of that. Tomato,
yeah, right. Deities,
embodiments, it's all the same shit. But again, that kind of leads into another little facet of world building or presenting the world that you've created to role players, is that you don't want to pull the curtain back on your setting too fast either. You don't want by the third session your players to be talking to the god of all things.
Yeah,
because there's nowhere to go from there. You can't raise the stakes any higher than reality is going to be destroyed.
Right.
So if they're dealing with that in session 3, because you're really proud of how you named this super being.
Yeah.
You love pronouncing his name. Yeah. It's just like, oh, no, this is great. I had this idea last night. You're not. And I'm so guilty of this. Like, in my early days of DMing, I was so ready for the role players to just, like, get into heaven or, like, to get down into hell. And, like,
evil
yeah.
I think that's a big concern. Is that you, across the board, actually, I guess it's, the trope of the monolithic evil, without nuance or careful handling, you'll set your players up in a situation where they're lining up to save the world at level 1 or something.
Yeah,
and then you don't probably want that usually, but there are campaigns. I mean, that's the whole point. Like some of the super dungeon crawls in older editions, that's like the idea. So it works if you want a campaign that's like an action movie kind of, where it's more like it's kind of all climax all the time, where you're moving from one big point of thing to the next big point of thing, and it just keeps going until they're level 20 and actually are gods themselves.
Really hard not to run something like that without just railroading your players from one encounter to the next to just get them to that point that you want to go.
But there are parties that want that, or that are more at least comfortable kind of being taken along with a story, and are expecting to just kind of follow, like, okay, what's basically bridge in combat encounters with a couple sentences of narrative fluff, and that's cool, that's fine. D&D works for that. There's nothing wrong with it. I would play 3.5 or Pathfinder if you're gonna do that. But because because there's just more versatility, and it's, I think, a better representation of combat.
Right.
Kind of. It's more complicated, but that's why it's better, I guess.
Right.
I don't know. But if you're trying to stay away from that, and your goal is something more like narratively representative, I think you can get a lot more mileage out of a simpler system like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, like what Bags is saying, you really don't want to railroad your party into killing God because you want that to tell that story. You know, that's not. It kind of going along with what I say a lot is that, you know, you get into being a DM to make a story with other people, not to tell a story that you've written. You become a novelist to do that, or a playwright, or something else that isn't a
Video game designer.
Yeah, video game designer. Where, you know, you're expected to railroad your audience along from one thing to another, but it's not the case in DMing. That's not.
Well, it's not about it's not even so much the railroading. It's as it is like modules and stuff like this. The published material. Sometimes I think you can run into this where it's like you kind of either they run around and go completely off book for 4 levels, and you got to kind of, you know, pull your hand out, you know, way out of your ass to get everybody into the back into it by 2 chapters later or something, or you're just following along on something where it's basically like, okay, where's the next fight? Okay, let's go. And like, I mean, it's again, it's keep things slushy. Try not to plan too much too far ahead, especially into combat stuff like that, because then if you determine too much of your story before it gets to your players, and without their interaction, then it's kind of like, why are you role playing? You know, you could be doing something else to tell that story, probably in a way that won't be frustrating your players, unless that's what they're looking for. You know, every table.
Yeah, and that's another thing. Another table 13. I said euphemism, but that's not the right word. A colloquialism. There we go.
I like euphemism.
Table 13 euphemism. Every table is different. Yeah, you know what we're saying.
Yeah, I'm saying.
Like every table is different. This is just our opinions and comments. This is not to be taken as any kind of gospel. We're just a couple of nerds who've been doing this hobby for way too long and have accrued some experience in the topic.
Attention. If you or a loved one has been diagnosed with lycanthropy, you may be entitled to financial compensation. Lycanthropy is a rare, uncontrolled animalis transformation linked with monster bite exposure. Exposure to monster bites in the mercenary, adventuring, questing, or mortuary industries may put you at risk. Please don't wait. Raven 1-800-99-RAR-RNG for a free legal consultation and a financial information scroll. Lycanthropy patients send a Raven now. 1-800-RAR-RNG.
Accrued. There's got to be a better way to say that. Like, accrued. I could do this for a while now, too.
Yeah.
Yep.
I'm sensing it.
Do you have another thing that you have written in your big notebook there, Eric? Or that I haven't touched on yet?
So it kind of goes back to some of the stuff we were talking about last week with the like tweaking kind of the fluff as written stuff. I think it's like a good point to start with, like, what's the same between your setting and what's different with, you know, from the established D&D lore, basically, because that's where players are gonna kind of need to know, is like races, classes, things like that. If there's any major changes, like, okay, tiefling aren't actually demon related in this one, they're, you know, something else, or whatever, or they're not, you know, they're at least not feared or hated.
Vampires in this setting are not undead.
Frustrates me. They've been mentioned to be undead before. Anyway.
As you can see, there are world building things that you know we have done together before that are still points of contention, even.
No, I don't get frustrated about that at all. That's not silly to me.
This zombie is technically alive. It's
not a fucking zombie. Anyway,
sorry.
But no, yeah. it's like I think yeah, that's the point is you want to start with what's the same and what's the difference between your setting and the established lore. I like to go through races that are important in your setting, and
Yeah.
then yeah, talk about like, okay, are they treated differently or do they act differently? Are they, whatever?
Good
And
point.
like I've got one, my the Kingdom of Alrise that setting for my Sunday game is halflings are like Maori kind of Polynesian island dwelling people thing. They've got like the tattoos and the whole spiel, like, and that's their shtick, and like that's basically like all halflings. They're called spicelings, and they are like boat faring trading people and all that stuff. Like you can do stuff like that where it's just like, okay, now dwarves do this now, or they build pyramids or something.
Right. Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like it's
Strip
you
mine.
can do whatever. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
like they're not underground. It's like something totally different. Or I see a lot of times, which I don't love. It kind of goes back to the monolithic evil stuff a little. But the like savage races like orcs, goblins, and so on down the line, kind of just being like default evil because they're
Right.
evil.
Yeah.
I don't like that a ton because it's just sort of like, well, I don't know. Like I'd rather write it like, no, yeah, like orcs just get slaughtered every time they gather in groups of more than 20 by any adventuring crew that wants to make a name for themselves. So yeah, they're fucking pushed to the
Goblins are
fringes of
endangered.
society and can't be yeah, exactly, they're yeah, whatever, like analog to the first Australian peoples or whatever, it's like the kind of native tribe folks that have just kind of had their lands pushed into or Native Americans, I suppose, first Americans, whatever. But I think yeah, you can toy with the perception versus reality kind of
Right.
dichotomy. Like maybe orcs are seen like that by the quote unquote civilized races, but orcs actually are just spiritual nomadic people who are trying their best to survive and really shitty pushed out of all the good ones or something.
With everyone being so damn racist towards them.
It's like, what am I supposed to do? Yeah, I can't get a job. Well, of course I'm hunting people and raiding supply lines. I literally cannot do anything else.
So you bring up an excellent point that I think I want to like kind of circle back around. You want to communicate consequences of picking a certain race to your players clearly, because there have been, no one wants to roll up an elf, and then the first town they get to, everyone is like, kill the elf, kill the elf.
Race.
Worse.
Yeah, it's a Frankenstein's monster, so yeah, torches and pitchforks or whatever.
Yeah.
That's not fair to kind of spring that on your players without them knowing.
You want to, because then they're going to approach the city differently. They would have if they knew that they were so their race was so reviled. So you really want to make sure you give your players like the chance to make reasonable decisions based on like character creation by telling them enough about your world to get that going. You don't want to surprise them with things like that, or or kind of going along kind of what I was joking about. If someone rolls a paladin and the first undead they come up to, they try to turn undead, like, oh, in my world zombies are actually the mortals that are possessed by aliens. They're not undead. And you're just like, okay, well then why did you let me do my character would know that this spell doesn't work on these
he lives here.
Why would you let me do this?
So I think that again, it kind of goes back to another greater point, that is, in general, you want, if there's across your world, if you're building your world, you don't want players to suffer consequences of information that they haven't had any reasonable reason to have access to. Necessarily, I mean, unless it's setting appropriate. There are situations where it's like, yeah, you just walked into a town you've never been in before, you didn't know anything about it, and you were being an ass.
Right.
So like, yeah, there's consequences. But like, if it's a town that's 2 towns over from where they grew up, and they didn't do this thing that everybody does that's a customary gesture or something, you shouldn't be punishing them for that. Or they mentioned the wrong guy, ostracized. Like, they'd know those kind of conventions.
Yes.
Yeah. So you don't want to punish players for stuff that you just haven't conveyed to them or that they forgot because it's a very dense setting or
what's
something.
worse, and what I've seen in terms of like on the internet, people telling horror stories, is that the DM kind of treats all the role playing characters, the player characters, regardless of race or class, like strangers to the world.
Yeah.
And so you get this really weird like thing where you have role playing characters that are like fit the setting in terms of like their like what they're dressed like and where they came from, but then they act like aliens in the country that they're supposed to be from, and everyone treats them as such. When
and that's it's not even necessarily a malicious thing.
No,
it's just,
no, not at all.
they're just it's a failure of communication essentially at the beginning. Like it's some session 0 stuff. That's the other thing. If you're doing a homebrew session, if you're running any campaign, you should do a session 0. But like if you're doing a homebrew session, you definitely want to do a session 0 where you talk over everybody's character concepts and how they can connect them to this setting and kind of do things like that.
Yeah, you want to try to connect your player characters into the world that you've created, kind of like plugging them in, I guess, so that when they interact with the world, they interact with it in a way that isn't going to make them look like an alien to your NPCs. And even so, I think as the DM, it's kind of your responsibility to try to smooth over those kinds of things as much as possible, rather than make them points of contention or problems for your characters to overcome. Because, like you said, if they don't,
they're not like maliciously intended,
right? Yeah, exactly.
They're not like thoughtless and clearly being intentionally rude, trying to stop. Then okay, whatever, you play them down the line, but I think you don't want, you just don't want them suffering from things that you don't want to be too ticky tacky. I see it along the same lines as not tracking food or arrows. It's just like,
it's not how
let it slide. It's not that big of a.
Though, of course, again, every table's different. So if you've got a DM who really likes keeping track of every one of your arrows,
or you're a player who thinks that I'm stupid because I don't think it's important. To track
exactly.
Those things. Like,
let's go ahead. Yeah, I have
food's less so. I actually like making players or keeping track of the fact that because it tends to lend players into a more role play situation, which is good. But that's more of a generic DMing thing than a world building.
Yeah. But it kind of goes into world building while DMing at the same time. Like that's something I wanted to get across this episode too, is that that world building and DMing, like running a session and building a world, are not separate things. Like you are building the session or building the world while you are running the session, whether you mean to or not. You are you're presenting.
I was gonna say, I almost look at it differently. It's not built until it comes to the table and the players have interacted with it, because it's just the way you think it's gonna go. It's not about actually. Just again laughing at the chat here, but it's not it's like a script in your head before you actually make the movie, kind of a thing. It doesn't until the finished product happens, until what the players remember and interact with happens. It's not consequential yet.
Right.
So I don't. I get some broad stroke stuff, but if they haven't interacted with it, I don't continue on it. I guess you don't want to flesh stuff out that they're not touching.
Right.
I suppose we've said before. But.
Yeah, exactly. So we got a question from Anarchy here, more of a request on the Table 13 Discord chat bar here. Is he asks, can you talk about how to prepare world building for sessions and arcs, and over and under preparing? So
sure.
I guess I kind of want to tackle this question backwards. I want to talk about over and under preparing first, and then talk about like how I go about world building for individual sessions or world building for full arcs, because it's actually like something I do. I will like sit down and come up with some world building concepts, like minor stuff, like who the mayor is sleeping with, if they're trying to figure that out for this next session because it's important. I will like make sure I have a name.
Yeah.
rather
Maybe
than
a connection to some other family
Yeah.
that's influential or that they've already
Yeah.
interacted with or something.
So to go from like over and under preparing. So this is kind of one of those. There isn't like if you don't have this done, you're underprepared every time. You can be perfectly prepared with nothing, depending on the table or the session or a lot of stuff. But in general, I will like give a little bit of my thoughts in terms of like what is under preparing and what is over preparing by giving a situation. If you have if you end a session where a group is like, okay, we need to find out everything about like John Smith because he is our contact to get into the super secret bad guy headquarters. And if you like just blow it off and then sit down at the session without anything for them to explore or find out about John Smith, you're just pulling it out of your ass during the session, that is, you have underprepared. You have like kind of played yourself a little bit because you're the one who set that up. You gave them.
And they told you.
Yeah, and they
that
told
they were
you
going to do it.
Yeah, and you saw the hill coming and you did nothing to prepare for it. That would be underpreparing in my book. Now, if you sat down and was like, John Smith was born 24 years ago, and it was Monday at 4:15. The clouds were just breaking up when he opened his eyes for the first time. That is over preparing. They're not gonna need everything about John Smith to get into this organization. They're not gonna need everything. They're not gonna need to know everything about John Smith in order to have a meaningful experience interacting with him. I kind of break it down into like kind of groups of threes, I guess. Like if you have a NPC that you've built nothing for, that your players are interested in, and you have time to prepare for it, you want to like come up with 3 connections that they have to the thing that makes them important, and just like kind of write a paragraph about each of those things, but leave slush for you to like change stuff around or shift things as they get into this. Because I find 3 to be a great number because it's enough that they have the illusion that the person is real, but it's not it's not 10 things. It's not 5.
Yeah.
It's a good, nice number.
And if 2/3 of them don't come to the table,
then
you're not out that much work.
Yes.
Which I agree with that.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah.
So I think there's like that happy medium. I agree 100% with so far that sort of like assessment. I do think that like kind of you can like I don't unless it's a combat encounter that they like I try to end off a session right before it usually, and then prep for that, because if you do it too far ahead, your party might not be the same level that they were if you're doing milestone. Like stuff could stretch out and suddenly they've leveled up and now your encounter's not right and you've got to re-prep it anyway. So I try to wait and do what I can with that. But I do think that you like you were saying, if there's an express thing that they want to do in the next, some goal, something that they want to achieve, you want to have a reasonable number of things like figured out around that, some hooks that can go into that. But I mean, you're going to spend half the session doing that probably, and half the session doing something else that you never could have prepared for anyway.
Right.
So you want to that's where I think like just having a sort of lifelike world, or at least some general stuff about where your people are, this kind of settings and stereotypes basically that you can use to springboard yourself into who the specific barrel merchant that they're talking to is, or whatever, and like what he could possibly want, like that's it's I think the important things basically.
Yeah, and Bags brought up something that I've talked about in the original Table 13, is that for things that you cannot possibly prepare for, or like, well, I guess not that, but like for things that the players are trying to find out, you don't want to nail like going back to the John Smith example. If you say like John Smith was married, he divorced Jane 5 years ago. So if they talk to Jane Smith, they'll learn something, about John, or they'll learn this about John. But for some reason, they have it in their mind that, it's not Jane Smith that they're looking for. It's like the cleaner or something.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't want to be like, oh, they're just going to spend the whole session learning nothing because, they picked the wrong person. You want to go, okay, how can I take these three things that I have John Smith and connect one of them to the cleaner that they're after to make it worth their while to make this decision, because that's, you want them to have fun and you want them to feel clever by like, oh, if we hadn't noticed her acting this way, we never would have gotten this information. That's genius. And you're like, oh, I just had a cough. Yeah, like
went with you.
Yeah,
and like I didn't mean to. Yeah, but like, and like, yeah, I think that's really important too. The other side of that is it stretches out what you have done to prep
right
further if you can be flexible with it and kind of like say, okay, but if I reconnect this to this, or maybe the cleaner's a mistress that was somehow involved in the same thing and might still have access to similar information. Thanks, trying to hang out here, but yeah, then yeah, you can say, all right, maybe they're right, and it works still. It doesn't tear apart your plot.
Right.
But if it's not the case, then you need to put clear and obvious signposts, I think, in the way along as you're going. It's just sort of like in the setting that the players would run into that are like, hey, you're chasing, like a wild goose right now.
Right.
And you need to, yeah, it's like, look at it again, but it's usually easier because your players that are on the wrong track will see something that you're trying to say is like clearly and obviously wrong. It's like, oh, well, they're fighting us on it. That means we're right. And like, so we've got to continue. Like, obviously, they wouldn't be trying to resist us if we, or whatever, it's for something like that. And so you get into these holes where it's just sometimes easier to rework it a little and let them be right.
Right. Yeah, exactly. That's the thing. That's the problem of like nailing things too far down, is because you can, like, the role players could just, choose to try to go down a path that you're like, oh, there's nothing down there. And you either railroad them and be like, stop, guys, that's the wrong decision. You want to talk to this guy instead. Or you're just like, oh, sorry, you spent that whole session following that guy. He was just a dude. That it's going to taste bad in their mouth. They're not going to.
Wait,
right,
just like, sucks to suck. You got it wrong.
Sorry. And, it's not, again, every table is different, but like in my opinion, it's a better session if they like found that, oh man, that dude that we were following actually had this information, and if we hadn't picked up on that little thing, we wouldn't have gotten it.
Right.
So Bags, I'm going to tell this story that Bags brought up because I think it shows, it kind of exemplifies a lot of the things that we're talking about. So I had a group that ended a session by, actually, I think you were in this group, Mr. E. They were walking from one city to another city to find out about a bandit leader's, he had a note that said, like something about the Nightingale calls. And they had this note, and they were going to this bar, and they were going to try to find out more information. On the way, they walked through a farm, and the farmer's daughter was dying. Well, I think they were a druid or someone in the party had some kind of medicine check and found out that she had eaten some kind of poisonous plant. They found a antidote, cured her, and the farmer was like, "Thank you so much. I don't have any money to repay you, but instead I'm going to tell you that my cousin owns the bar, and it happened to be the bar that they were looking for. He owns this bar, and if you tell him that you saved my daughter, he'll give you a room free, and he'll let you, he'll talk about everything." And so they went to the city. You guys went to the city, and you immediately forgot about that farmer. You immediately forgot that you'd saved his daughter, and you walked into the bar, and you guys started telling this thing. You didn't even talk to the bartender. You guys just went to each table and was like, hey, there's a saying, there's a saying, do you guys remember it? And so my plan was that you could march into the bar and just immediately talk to the bartender because, duh, you just saved his niece's life and he was going to give you a free room and shit. But no, you forgot.
If memory serves, it was like 2 weeks or so.
It might have been another session, yes. But so my idea was that this bartender, his daughter was going to be part of the gang that you guys were looking for, part of the bandit gang. But you never talked to him. Right. Instead, there was a farmer that you said this saying to who was like, oh, whoa, don't say that. That's like bad shit. And the only reason I said that was because you guys were literally saying like the most evilest like cults like saying to just random people. And they were like, whoa, that's scary. But you guys were like, that farmer knows something. And then you left the bar following him. I was like, God damn it. So I got this NPC that's got all the information you need, and you have a front door to just get all the information, and you're not doing it. You're following this farmer. So I could have just been like, like I could have railroaded you back into the bar and like forced you to talk to the thing, or I could have just let you follow the farmer until you guys got tired of it. But instead, I was like, okay, instead of the bartender, it's going to be the farmer's daughter who was in the deep. And the reason that he said that was that it was because he was reminded of his daughter who left to join this bandit gang. And you guys found that out by like you were outside his house, you talked to his goddamn wife, you like literally gave this guy the fucking 9 rounds, and you found out a ton of information that was supposed to be found out back in the city at the bar, at the bartender that you never interacted with. And so, so instead of choosing one of the two extreme options where you're just railroading them back to the NPC that you've set up, or just letting them go on this wild goose chase to harass a farmer and his wife who know nothing about the thing that you're talking about, you want to mix those two things. You want to let the role players play, like pick up on whatever they want to, but you still want to reward them with the thing they were going after at the end, or at least something else.
To get that, if you can find a way to connect what you have to what they're doing, or at least, there's a domino effect somewhere that gets what they're doing to cause an effect, something to help them out, or make it clear what they're supposed to do. Or at least, send some people who have more information to attack them that they can take prisoner or something, down the line. It's just, you don't want them floundering out there just without the information that they need to succeed, and then, you not doing anything to connect that back.
Because the information is
like
more
what they feel like is the successful plot.
Yeah, exactly. Like the feeling of success with the information is more important than the mouth that gives it to them. As long as they figure it out, and as long as they figure it out organically. I see a lot of like D&D horror stories where they're like the DM, every time an NPC opened his mouth, was exposition to get them to do something. Every single NPC was like, oh man, I sure hope that the mountain doesn't wake up and eat half the village again. And like no one had just anything
said, hey,
to say.
How's it going?
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, nice weather we're having.
No one was
like every
having
once
a
in a while,
day.
people do say that.
Even if they're under the threat of constant death, they still find things to talk about that's not instant death.
It's at least not raining right now. Like that.
That's good. Or they have like other things that they're worried and concerned about. Each one of us is kind of, or it has an entire universe inside of us, and you want to kind of represent that in your NPCs a little bit by like, if they walk up and they talk to somebody, the first instance that they talk to them, they might be having a really bad day. That NPC might be just pissed off that day. And the next day they talk to him, they're great. And like that happens in real life, and that can influence your story a lot.
Yeah.
So we got another
like Lang with you guys in the chittering.
Yeah.
It's like periodic, like the first time they interacted with him was like at the end of this big festival, and basically he had been having to come over and deal with them periodically throughout this whole
Did you just attack
day.
those kids?
And it's just like, God damn. And yeah, one of the things they had done was bloody the nose of a child. And so he was, it was like the kid was engaging in like some vandalism behavior. So he was kind of being a shit. But like, so that's where we were. And it wasn't like a intentional, like he came up and punched him in the nose. I guess I should say that. They, like, it was a bad roll on a shove to get him away from the cart. And so I made him push him into the cart because I thought that was a funny consequence for the failed check, because it's not like he wouldn't be able to barrel over a kid. It's just, do it wrong. But yeah, and so that's you can flexibility within characters builds a connection to the setting that it makes them feel kind of real, like you're saying, and that's it sort of gets you to a point where then if they're invested in that stuff, maybe the guard, they don't want to piss him off personally, then maybe they won't go around just murking fools, or maybe they will, just not care.
Yeah, Paladin was the first person to get killed. There was 2 javelins to the back of a
fling. Although I had a guy who he had reason to catch, and he's a paladin, and he didn't have any other way to slow him down. So that's on me.
That's all right. All right. So Bags wants to. He asks. I assume contrast the concept with like the floating NPC with where you. He said it wasn't last week. It was 2 weeks ago. Where we talked about how you have the more developed an NPC is, the greater connection the party has to the NPC, or at least like the more unique or useful the NPC is, they get connected. He says you develop a voice, a backstory, motivation, and then the characters completely ignore the NPC, or they just don't interact with them at all. I think that the idea is like who the NPC is, like the name and the face, or even like the voice in a little bit, is like frosting, and the cake is the important part, and that's like what you want to present with this NPC. You want to have like an idea of the kind of NPC that you want in your group before you name the NPC. So, for example, in Dragons of Pearlandia, there is a very beloved NPC named Jessie Pearfield, field spelled with a PH, and she is, useful in terms of she knew how to raise the baby dragon eggs, and so they kept her around. And I don't remember exactly why you agreed to go rescue Jessie.
She was, it was a guy in town who had influence on the council, who was going to let us get the supplies that we needed to take back to Shoal. But, he was like fucked by the time we got there with the supplies, as I recall. So.
Yep, and it was all destroyed. That was great.
Yeah,
I got to destroy Tilly's hometown.
Yeah, that was nice.
Anyway,
loving character connection, just murked.
So yeah, the character Jessie, it only became fleshed out when I realized that they were going to stay, when she was going to stay with the party. I wouldn't sit down and be like, okay, I'm gonna like write up, Sean Baxter. He's gonna be the party's best friend. He's gonna stay with them. He's gonna be witty. He's gonna have black hair, green eyes. And then you're like, and in that session you're like, all right. And then at the bar you see a man with black hair and green eyes, and he smiles and winks at you. And you're like, oh, that's creepy. We're not gonna talk to that dude. And then they turn around and leave.
Yeah. Or it's like, oh, we're gonna rob him or something.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like,
no, you can't rob Tom.
No, you can't. He's so cool. Just talk to him.
I spent 6 hours working on his backstory.
Yeah.
I see a lot of that actually in like the DM help on Reddit. Yeah, exactly. So the way that you don't let that happen is all of that dressing, like his name, his eye color, his hair, or like anything about him that distinguishes him as a unique individual that you can't just fill shoes with. Like you can have someone who's like kind, they're helpful, they're connected to the police force in this way, they have, a pet companion that they keep in their pockets, small mouse, and none of that, is determined by their hair color or eye color. So they could talk to anybody in the bar, and you're just like, and this is Baxter. This is the person that I built right here. It fits in well with the party dynamic. Because you never. It's like you have a baby. You're never gonna know what that baby's gonna look like at age 20. So you can't be like,
wasn't sure where this was going.
It's the same way with like role playing NPCs. Like you have this NPC that they're interacting with, and you don't know if they're going to become the beloved PC that everyone loves in 6 sessions. You have no idea. Like Shavies in the Chittering, like that became such an integral part of that part of the campaign. Like I went
will I put shaved ice into a fucking campaign.
We ate Shavies fucking once a session, and it was wonderful.
There was 3 times in one of them. Don't talk to me about once a session.
Man,
you average really, better than once a session.
I really love my shaved ice.
Still, after not eating for 2-3 sessions now.
But that's the thing. Is like you don't know what your characters are going to connect to, and so you want to, have all those things you want to present an NPC in your back pocket until they basically choose their NPC. If that's like something that your players are into too. It's like there are some parties that you just can't get an NPC to connect to, and it's just just how it works.
So when I'm making NPCs, I try to. So there are like 3 things that I worry about, and I want to have one of them when I interact with the party with this NPC, and it's voice, purpose, and connection. And like voice is what they sound like, how they'll whatever. And usually that's the only one I have, but that because you can do whatever with that, but it defines the character as much as anything else that the players will interact with, because it's what they're gonna feel the most. If you can make them sound civilized and educated, they'll know that the party will understand that just from the way they speak, or if they use a lot of slang or have a southern accent or what, what I mean. Like if you're doing stuff like that, that'll help you define further how your character is, fills these other 2 things for me at least. And then so and then purpose is not like it's like your purpose for that NPC as a DM. Like why do they need to exist? And for that it's you just their function is the skeleton that you can use. It's like, okay, well, I need them to serve this purpose. Why would they want that? Or why would they be afraid of this happening so that they can help the party do this? Or like whatever. And that kind of stuff I think is a pretty important thing if you're trying to build an NPC out. But I usually don't worry about that stuff until they've already interacted with them, or it's a situation where I've just got to pull an NPC out because they're going up to talk to somebody I didn't expect them to talk to, pump for information or something. It's like, well, okay, who is he? Why could he be involved in this? And how can I get out of this without having to invent 6 more NPCs first?
Yeah.
And so then it's and that leads into I think connection, which is like what other things in your setting do they have some sort of relationship with, positive or negative? Is there like usually that's the stuff that's like gives them value for continued interaction with the party. If there's something good that they can do, or something that the party's done that they can take personal exception to, or whatever. I mean, and it can be the same thing as your purpose. You just need them to serve this role. Like they've got to be the NPC that they're upset about right now. Or they're, the head thief in this neighborhood because that's where they are, and it needs to be somebody. Then you can kind of it's just draw the lines from that connection to like would they be to fill the role that they have to fill, kind of in your story. And those things are kind of minor bare points, that you can be flexible with and reattach to somebody else if they kill him too quick. Well, that was just the lieutenant. That's
Right.
not the actual boss.
Yeah.
You know, or something like that, and you can just say that's you shifted up a track, and then
Keep it
you've
fresh.
yeah, exactly. You've got flexibility where you can, because that's the beauty of coming to the table and playing a role playing game, is that everybody can have direct active influence on the events and course of the game.
Yep.
And you want to facilitate that as much as possible, because that's usually why your players are there.
Yeah. So Bags, I kind of want to go back to the thing we talked about, Bags, with the NPC there. I would say that unless you really know your table and you really know how they're going to interact to certain PCs, I think that building an NPC with the expressed intent for them to become a beloved NPC is going to be problematic, just because they're going to pick something different. They're not going to, the interaction with this NPC is going to be, at best, you're going to get really lucky and they're going to end up with the party and everything is going to work out. At worst, they're just going to completely ignore them or kill them or do something that goes against their, like, the reason that you built them. And while that isn't necessarily a bad thing, that could actually be like a pretty cool story hook if, like, this person was like, oh, I'm, here on command of the king to help your party, and they murder him. That might cause some problems down the road. But you don't, like I said, I go back to, I wait until the party picks an NPC of some kind.
That's what I was going to say.
Yeah, and then I apply, like, the usefulness or the tools that they need to become a beloved, like a normal member of the party. And it's not, I can't, like, it's a lot like falling in love, Bax. You just kind of know when it's right, and you can't force it.
Well,
Like,
exactly.
you can't just
your party is gonna choose the last NPC. It's gonna be Salty Sam, the salted kipper merchant, or Shavy's fucking nephew who sells shaved ice,
Kyle or Kevin or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. Or fucking Chad, or it's like, you can't determine that beforehand, and and setting it up so that they are directed toward that you really need this person in there. As a player, I would be suspicious of that NPC, because I assume that that's something you're putting in the party so that you can betray me with them later. Because I'm a metagamer and I can't help it. Like, but it's like, I think it's good to try and get an NPC that's in the party that's attached, because it gives you a voice.
Oh God, I hate when parties are interacting and they're in the forest alone, and they're like, I have like so many funny things that I want to say.
You just can't say it.
I just can't. There's the bird. It's like, oh, that's really funny. I just can't. I hate it. And so I love putting an NPC in the party, just for it. There's so many helpful things that an NPC that is friendly with the party can do for you as a DM, but you can't force it. You just gotta let it happen naturally, man.
And I think that's kind of the difference between the beloved NPC and the DMPC.
Right.
Is the DMPC you made with the intention of putting the party, or putting them with the party for the extent, the duration of the game.
Right.
Kind of on the equal footing with the rest of the characters. Whereas the beloved NPC is there because everybody wants them there, or they need them, or they're willing to, they're at least willing to put up with their bullshit drama because they're an expert in some field that they need, or something like that. But that's the thing, is if it's someone that they need, not that they want, but that they're willing to begrudgingly accept, then you kind of want to lean into that tension and use that as a point of comedy, and it's okay. That's good. Yeah.
There's so many characters that I do that with.
Yes.
Oh man. But yes, that's the thing. Is that you really do want to you don't want to put the cart before the horse. 'Cause I guess the end of that trail there is really
all of this.
not just like an NPC, but really or not just like the beloved NPC, but really constructing any hard and fast NPC. Like, okay, this is going to be their relationship with the party is gonna end in some kind of failure, like almost all the time. If you're
gonna have to rewrite it, or flex it, or toss it, because it's just not gonna fall into place like you wanted to.
Like they're gonna hate this guy because he's gonna like murder a baby in front of him, and then the warlock's like, "Oh, dude, this is my favorite person." And you're like, "No, you're supposed to hate this man."
Exactly.
It's not going to work out like you want it to. That's the fun of being a DM, though. Is like you just so that's what I don't ever like think about. I don't build the NPC with the express and purpose of building them so they have a relationship with the role players. I build them so that they have a relationship with the world, and then I let the role players interact with that NPC however way they want to, and I just feed off of that. If they treat him like an asshole and they hate him, I'm going to just like kind of lean into that and like make them the asshole. If they're like, "Oh, this is our best friend. He's a little sketchy, but we like him." I'm going to like lean into that, like
exactly.
And NPCs too, especially because, and this is kind of like not, if you're doing a podcast, this is completely different. But if you're just sitting at a table role playing and you don't have any way of like listening back, NPCs have a very funny way of changing session to session based on like this kind of process of like leaning into certain personality traits that your role players are like really responding to. That you can have a role NPC that like at first was like kind of a he's just a normal guard, and then a few sessions down the road, the only normal person that the role players have ever met in this town, and they love him to death. And it just happens like that. You just never. I did not expect Bevan to become quite as
Dr. Bevan.
Dr. Bevan. Yes.
It's PhD.
PhD. P-E-V-I-N. Yep. And yeah, so that's kind of what I go down. So we got another question here. I think we got a little bit of time. Not an audience plant.
Nice. I don't know if I buy it.
I don't know if I buy it either. I think this is a plant, guys.
Yeah.
So do you create any sort of story in your world building, like at least the motivations of big players? How do you start to reveal this to players who are playing in a different direction? So I treat the story of the world building more of like the story of the world. Like I just like I want to make a setting that has a kind of like a story to it, flow to it, if you want to say, like some kind of setting that if the role players never were there, it would still operate in the way that it operates. You're going to have people that want power. You're going to have, people that are vying for control over certain things. People are going to be more or less moral or lawful in the way they achieve their goals. But I don't ever sit down and they're like, okay, session 1 is when they're going to meet the Dark Lich's assistant. We're going to give them the goblet to take to this mountain. And then second session, when they're in the mountain, they're going to meet, Silly Sam, the goblin. And he's going to give them the key that opens up the chest at the bottom. I don't do that. Because by session 2, they're going to be in the top floor of the bar, planning to rob the bank in the town, and they're going to never make it to the mountain where Silly Sam is, because they're going to have they're going to become bank robbers for the entire campaign, and that's how I build the story. I take what the role players are interested in the first few sessions, and I try to like go off of that. I try to push them in the direction that they want to go, or I like help them go in the direction that they want to go, while putting, like it's kind of like putting roadblocks in front of myself that the role players then have to get over. Because you don't want to they want to become king of the world. You're like, well, here's the crown. You want to present some kind of story to them based on what they've chosen to do. If that makes sense in terms of like, if session 1, I start them, I do have like first mission. I do try to set up something for them to do in session 1.
Yeah.
But it's always
you want
like
a first arc.
Yeah. It's always like kill the rats in the larder, or like go find
Or like
this
there's some
bandit camp.
bandits fucking around outside of town. Yeah,
Yep.
which
And
is
that's
the
as
chittering.
far
it's,
as I do with the storyline, and then how they operate in like those first couple of sessions, or how they solve that arc, is where then I start building the bigger arc for them. For example, in Dragons of Paralandia, the first 3 or 4 sessions were like they went to a inn the very first session, and there was no chicken in this inn, and the bartender was like, "I'm sorry, I don't have any chicken. There's been bandits on the road. I can't get any chicken." And they were like, "Oh, well, fuck it. We'll just go get the supplies from the other road if you pay us a crazy amount of money." Intimidation. Yeah. And I had no story. I was like, "Sure, why not? Yeah, go for it.
Whatever.
Go for it." And then they went to the town, and I was like, "Well, the town's not just going to give them supplies. There's got to be some problem they have to achieve, and it's the bandits, who have set up in this cabin, and this dude has this girl, his daughter has got kidnapped for weird reasons." And then we took a few times off, and a few sessions off, and I was like, "Okay, I'm going to put fucking dragon eggs in this fucking cabin," And I was like, that'll be cool. It'll be cool to see what they do with dragon eggs. That might be the plot of the story. I don't know. They might just smash them. Who knows?
To do that.
Yeah, he did. He really did.
Argued for that for like 3 sessions.
Yeah. And so, and they found the dragon egg, and they're like, "We're going to keep these eggs." I was like, and there is my story. And now I get to tell the story of how they have the dragon eggs.
Sorry, real quick here before we get off. Not an audience planned here. So how do you introduce cosmology? The big stroke stuff for that, like the major points that you want to connect. For me, at least, that's session 0 stuff. You want to do that during character creation to make sure that your characters who are interested in that know about it while they're making their character. I think, anyway.
Yeah.
Because honestly, I basically just make a list of gods with some domains and sort of a portfolio, and then don't worry about it unless there's a cleric or there's somebody, somebody who's got a very religious bent to their character, or, who's really interested in the cosmology of the world, because then it's just detail that might not be important, especially if you're like me and you tend to play settings where the gods aren't super active.
Right. And again, so if your cosmology is a large world building twist, I would caution against running a campaign with the intent of presenting a cosmological twists, because it's going to be really difficult to get your players to discover that without either A, just dumping the exposition on them, or B, railroading them into the place that they need. You want to, if like the cosmology is a twist, like let's say the god, the highest god, actually like dethroned the actual high god, and now he's keeping him in a like a magical cell beneath the world, and he's like the false god. The role players who are in a bar are never, they're not gonna care about that. It's not gonna come up,
and it's gonna be hard to introduce things like that without it just being like a cult that knows the truth, or something, and that they basically just read the truth in a book somewhere, which like you're saying, it's pretty much you either just dump it on them at some point where it's like hard to lead up to without Hey man, it's the way it goes sometimes. I've done it myself. It was all a dream, or the time resets. I think it's I've done some. It's been a long time. I've made some silly things that I regret, but sometimes they work really well too. So you can't just because it's hard or we say it's not a good idea doesn't mean don't do it.
No,
your players may really key off of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And like again, it's your table, so if you're the DM, you get to decide. And because I have done campaigns where I've built big cosmologies and then got really excited about introducing those big cosmologies to the role players and gotten into a point where once the role players have met like the god of all or like the very embodiment of order, and like talked about their conflicts and the very upper reaches of the universal firmament that you've created, you have nowhere to go, and your role players are going to be basically either just errand boys, where the god is like, go get this thing, come back, and then go get this thing and come back, or they're just going to be like along for the ride.
Yeah, watching the god do things.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, or if it's not, it's like, well, why aren't you just doing it, dude?
Right.
You're way more efficient. Like you just be there and back or something. So yeah, I think that's a concern too.
Yeah.
Oh, no.
So it's just you want to be careful about trying to if you have a really cool twist, if you think of a really cool twist cosmologically, plot wise, or anything before the campaign, don't expect to actually use it in the way you think you're going to use it. Keep it in your back pocket until you find that opening in the session or in the campaign to be like, now I can use this idea.
It's going to be great.
Yeah, it's going to be great right here. And
they've built into this. Or
and if it never happens, you haven't done any work that you had
start another campaign in that sense.
Exactly.
And run a different game with a different crew of adventurers, and maybe they'll figure it.
Yeah. And that's the fun, is that like if you want to just introduce like a plot twist or something like that, and that's where you should write a book, or like do if you have a really cool scene that you want to describe in prose, don't do it in role playing, because it's going to be really hard to get the player characters are not audience members in a play. They're not just sitting in cushy seats and you're on stage presenting NPCs that are doing stuff. That's not why it's not why many players get into role playing. They don't get into role playing to just watch a story unfold without their involvement, nor do they get into role playing to play like the part that you have envisioned this person playing.
The party's gonna do this.
Yeah,
I mean, but sometimes that is the goal. That's
right.
It's like, okay, we want to save the world from this monolithic evil or something. It's like, okay, it's gonna take us 15 levels, guys. You're cool, all right? Here's the game. Let's do it.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like you can come to those understandings beforehand. But generally speaking, with your average party who's more interested in the narrative side of things and having more deterministic involvement in their fucking story or whatever, I'm not putting together sentences super well anymore. But that's but once you get to that point, I think or you have players who are at that point, it's easier or better to kind of leave it. I guess looser down.
Yep. All right, well, it is almost midnight, so we will probably call it there. Thank you very much for everybody who joined in and asked some questions. If you like what we're doing and you're not part of our Discord, join it. You can ask questions, interact with us board gods. We have a very wonderful community that is happy to help with any kind of role-playing questions that you might have. If you like us so much to donate money, we have a Patreon below, as well as links to artists and creators that are in our channel. So check them out. Thank you again for joining us for a session of Table 13.
We also do a podcast.
Oh, yes.
Called Dragons of Paralandia.
Right.
You can find on Spotify.
Dragons of Paralandia.
And
also have a bunch of other
everything else that has podcasts. Yeah.
Content. We have God's the
We stream every other Monday for that. And then is it every other Thursday?
Friday. Every other Friday for the Vault
every other Friday. I swear.
That will be next Friday as well, because we had one.
Mm-hmm.
The preceding week. So check us out there. We do a lot of silly stuff, and we make a lot of funny voices and tell some silly stories. So join us, and we'll make you one of us. One of us. That was great.
Did it.
All right. Thank you very much, everybody, and we'll see you next week.